You look at two people who are married. Maybe your parents. Maybe you. A ring, a certificate, a word, husband, wife, that somehow makes it official. Now, take all of that away. Picture 30 people on an open grassland. It's tens of thousands of years before anyone writes anything down. There are no courts, no priests, no paperwork, no government to register anything, no building to hold a ceremony in, no word for legally. Just a handful of humans, the fire and the dark. And somewhere in that group, two of them are a couple. Everybody knows it. Nobody wrote it down. There was no ceremony, no contract, no ring, and yet somehow it counted. How exactly did that work? So, how did humans invent marriage? Seriously, sit with that for a second. Because the thing you think of as ancient and eternal, the thing people call traditional, turns out to be one of the strangest inventions we ever came up with. And almost nothing about its real origin looks the way you'd expect. Here's the scale of what we're dealing with. Marriage feels older than everything. Older than your country. Older than your religion. But the version you're picturing, a ceremony, a contract, a legal union, is shockingly recent. Our species has been around for something like 300,000 years. The first hard evidence of a marriage ceremony shows up about 4,300 years ago. Do that math for a second. For more than 98% of human existence, there is no evidence of the thing you'd call a wedding. And the strangest part, the reason we finally invented it has almost nothing to do with love. That's the piece I want you to hold on to, because we're going to come back to it. And when we do, it might change how you see your own relationship. But before you can invent marriage, you have to invent something else first. And to see what, you have to picture what the world looked like before any of it existed. Go back to that grassland. There are no houses because nobody stays anywhere long enough to need one. There's nothing to inherit. Because you can't own land you're always walking away from, and you can't hoard grain you don't farm. Everything you have, you carry. When you die, your stuff gets shared out or left behind. There is no property in the way you mean it. And here's the thing that changes everything. In that world, it barely matters who a child's biological father is. The whole band helps raise the kids. Resources move around the group. Nobody's counting then. Somewhere, something changed. People started to settle. They started to farm. And for the first time in human history, a person could own something too big to carry. Land, herds, a granary, a house. Something that would outlast them. And the moment that happened, a brand new question appeared. A question no forager had ever really needed to answer. When I die, who gets it? That question is the seed of the whole thing. Because to answer it, you suddenly, desperately need to know exactly whose children are whose. And that is a much harder problem than it sounds. Most people assume marriage was invented to celebrate love. It's almost the opposite. The best evidence says marriage was invented to manage property and children, to draw a hard line around a woman's offspring and say, legally, these ones are his and therefore his wealth flows to them and nobody else. Romance wasn't the point. Inheritance was the point. Why? Because a man could always be certain which children were his mother's. He could never be certain which were his own. Marriage was, in a very cold sense, society's answer to that uncertainty. A public, enforceable claim. Think of it as the world's first paternity system, built thousands of years before anyone knew what DNA was. So, when we go looking for the first hard evidence, where do we find it? Not in a temple. In the archives. Around 2350 BC, in ancient Mesopotamia, modern-day Iraq, we get the earliest recorded evidence of marriage as a formal institution. And when historians read those records, they find something that sounds less like a love story and more like a real estate deal. Among the Sumerians and Babylonians, marriage was fundamentally a business arrangement. Its purpose, in the eyes of the state, wasn't companionship. It was procreation and the orderly transfer of property from one generation to the next. And here's the detail that stops you cold. Under Mesopotamian law, if a man and woman simply started living together without a contract, she was not his wife. Full stop. Love didn't make a marriage. Cohabitation didn't make a marriage. Cohabitation, a signed, executed legal document, made a marriage. Read that again. 4,000 years ago, a marriage without paperwork wasn't a marriage at all. Let's be honest about something, though. This doesn't mean those people felt nothing. There's real evidence of Mesopotamian couples who lived together, who loved each other, who grieved each other. The feelings were there. But the feelings were what the institution was for. The institution was for the in-laws, the dowry, and the heirs. The heart was a bonus. But knowing the rules existed is one thing. Then archaeologists found where those rules got written down, and it changed the story again. Because for a long time, marriage customs were just that, customs, unwritten. They varied from town to town, and if two families disagreed about who owed what, there was no rulebook to point to. Until one king decided to carve the rules into stone. Around 1754 BC, the Babylonian king Hammurabi produced one of the most famous legal documents in human history. Nearly 300 laws inscribed on a black stone pillar over 7 feet tall, set up in public where everyone could see it. And a huge share of those laws are about exactly one thing: marriage, dowries, divorce. What happens when a husband takes a second wife? What a woman is owed if she's cast out? Who inherits and how much? Picture standing at the foot of that pillar. You can't read. Almost nobody can. But you know what it means. It means the rules of your marriage are no longer up to your family or your village elders or you. They belong to the state now. Your love life just became law. And this is where it gets genuinely strange, because it forces a harder question. If marriage was really just a contract for property and heirs, why does every human culture on Earth have some version of it? Iraq, China, Egypt, Peru. Groups that never made contact, separated by whole oceans, all landed on the same institution. That can't just be about paperwork. Here's where the anthropologists come in, and where the story gets deeper than any legal code. In 2011, a team led by Robert Walker at the University of Missouri studied marriage practices across hunter-gatherer societies around the world, the closest living window we have onto how humans lived for most of our history. And they concluded that institutionalized pair bonding runs deep, stretching back at least to early modern humans. The contract is recent, but the pair bond underneath it is ancient, and that raises the reframe that changes everything. Maybe when did we invent marriage is the wrong question, because there are really two different things tangled together here. There's the pair bond, two humans forming a lasting attachment, wanting to stay near each other, raising kids together. That's biological and it's old. Older than farming, older than cities, maybe older than our species. And then there's marriage, the public, enforceable, society-approved version of that bond with rules and property attached. That's the invention. That's the paperwork wrapped around a feeling that was already there. We didn't invent the bond. We invented the contract around it. There's one last layer, and I saved it for the end, because it's the strangest part of all of this. For almost the entire history of marriage, from those Mesopotamian contracts right up until a couple of centuries ago, marrying for love was not the goal. In many times and places, it was seen as faintly ridiculous, even dangerous. The historian Stephanie Kuhns, who wrote the definitive history of the institution, puts it bluntly: the idea of marrying the person you're in love with would have struck most of our ancestors as absurd. Marriage was too important, too economic, too political to leave to something as unstable as passion. You married for land, for alliances, for useful in-laws. Love, if it came after, or not at all. Which means the thing you think marriage is fundamentally about, finding your person, marrying for love, is the newest part of the whole story. It's younger than the steam engine. For thousands of years, love and marriage weren't a matched pair. We only welded them together yesterday in historical terms. And that's you. That expectation you carry, that you should marry someone you love. That's not ancient tradition. That's the most modern part of you. So how did humans invent marriage? Now we can actually answer it. We didn't invent the feeling. That was already in us, tens of thousands of years deep. What we invented was everything wrapped around it. When we started to own things that outlived us, we needed to know whose children would inherit them. So we built a rule. The rule became a contract. The contract became a law carved in stone. And then, thousands of years later, almost as an afterthought, We decided the whole thing should also be about love. Property first. Law second. Love last. That's the real order. That's the invention. So, think back to that band of 30 on the grassland. No courts, no priests, no paperwork, and yet two of them, somehow, a couple that counted. They'd already discovered the oldest part of this. The bond was real. Everything we added since, the ring, the certificate, the word that makes it official, that's just us spending 4,000 years writing rules around something the human heart already knew how to do. The paperwork is new. The wanting is ancient.